issue of slavery is a pretty prominent issue in the book of Philemon and Reggie. How important is it for us to understand the nature of first century slavery when we're trying to understand this letter to Philemon?
It's a good question, Wes. But in the first place, it's not like here's where it's helpful to understand the difference between their world and our world. For Paul, actually the institution of slavery isn't under discussion at all. It is for us because of our cultural history. But for Paul, this is really more about a relationship between two men and the household that they live together in. It helps us, I think, to set aside some of our own cultural issues to understand what slavery did mean in that world, that it was much more a household relationship in the first place. It was often a means of people who had no means of support, no social safety net, to have protection and to have a place, to have a name that they wouldn't have otherwise had. For many people, being a slave was their status. And it helps us a lot to, not hyperventilate when we see Paul accepting slavery, to understand the nature of slavery in his day and see how different it was from the way slavery developed in the West subsequently.
Well, Reggie, Wes's question brought something to my mind, and that is, if it's important for us to have a more correct understanding of first century slavery, how important is it in general to understand the historical background of letters? Is that something that we should do for every book of the Bible?
Well, Christopher, as much as we can, sure. We believe in the sufficiency of Scripture. We believe, Scripture is the authority, and only Scripture is the authority. But that doesn't mean that we ignore, the very fact that we believe that Scripture is sufficient means we feel the obligation to find out as much as we can what it said in the first place to its listeners, and what our view of Scripture obligates us to is to take our bearings for what it means, as to what it means for us, on the basis of what it originally meant to the people that it was written to in the first place. So everywhere we can, we want to get as close to hearing it and reading it through their ears and through their eyes. For instance, if you read the letter to the Galatians, you realize pretty quickly that Paul is upset. And you don't have to have been a product of the first century to understand that when Paul says, "Oh, you foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you?" But if you read contemporary letters, you get a deeper sense, or more immediate sense, of Paul's anger, because you realize, after you read a few letters contemporary to Paul, that the custom was, before you got around to the point of your letter, after you said from so-and-so to so-and-so, that you would include and a greeting, that you would include some sort of a blessing or a prayer for their well-being. I mean, pagans as well as Jews and Christians did this sort of thing. But Paul eliminates that word of blessing or the word of prayer and goes straight for you foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you. And recognizing that Paul is dropping out a culturally expected wish or prayer or blessing, helps us to see just how upset he is about what's happening in Galatians. Now we can get on his wavelength anyway, but closer attention to the cultural situation that he wrote into, and the etiquette of letter writing makes us see, oh, he really is slapping them upside the head.